Driven by absolute despair, a terrified young woman clutches a pair of heavy metal pliers, her hands trembling uncontrollably. Believing a twisted supernatural entity has demanded a gruesome sacrifice to spare her family, she places the cold steel over her own small toe. Paralyzed with fear, she closes her eyes, bites down a scream, and ruthlessly severs the digit in a spray of warm crimson. She places the severed appendage into an archaic wooden box, praying for salvation. Crawling frantically to the kitchen for bandages, she is suddenly startled by a whispering voice from the shadows.
Quit your crying!
Returning to the living room with an abysmal sinking feeling, she pries the box open, only to find her dead toe still lying there, completely rejected. Seeking answers, she stares into a nearby mirror, asking her reflection what went wrong. Smiling with unhinged malice, the horrifying doppelganger slowly raises its hand, revealing a cleanly severed index finger. Realizing she had been entirely tricked by the sinister curse, her blood runs completely cold. The chilling narrative begins with a young woman named Polly returning to her quiet, desolate home after an exhausting day. Checking her voicemail, she is immediately met with a barrage of stressful messages, overdue subscription fees, and a stern mother urging her to finally secure a stable job. Feeling entirely despondent under the weight of her mundane struggles, she pours herself a stiff drink and settles down near the living room fireplace to escape the freezing winter chill. However, just as her tense muscles begin to relax, the sudden, shrill ringing of the doorbell shatters the silence. Opening the heavy wooden door, Polly is met with an inexplicable sight. A frail, shivering old woman stands on the porch, wrapped in a tattered coat and carrying a worn leather briefcase. Staring with a hollow gaze, the elderly stranger claims she is completely lost and insists she is related to the previous tenants of the house. Informing the woman she has the wrong address, Polly prepares to shut the door, but looking at the stranger's trembling frame and a mysteriously bandaged hand, her empathy takes over. Believing the freezing woman might have traveled a long distance, Polly kindly invites her inside to warm up. Stepping into the kitchen to brew a fresh cup of coffee, Polly leaves her guest unattended. Meanwhile, the old woman slowly stands up, her eyes scanning the living room with a chilling, calculated precision. Returning with a warm mug, Polly guides the stranger to a comfortable seat and politely asks if she knows her relative's phone number. Ignoring the question entirely, the old woman turns her piercing gaze toward Polly and asks if she is married. Confused by the invasive turn in the conversation, Polly shakes her head no. Pointing a bandaged finger at a framed photograph of a young girl, the stranger questions who the child is, if Polly is single. Clarifying the situation, Polly explains that she rents the house from her sister Lainey, and the child in the photo is her 5-year-old niece, Ollie. Absorbing this information, the old woman's demeanor shifts into something entirely sinister. Staring dead into Polly's eyes, she whispers, "I'm going to start now." Baffled by the cryptic statement, Polly asks what she means. Reaching into her worn briefcase, the stranger slowly extracts an archaic, intricately carved wooden box and places it firmly on the coffee table, declaring that the artifact now belongs to Polly. Popping the heavy brass latch, the old woman pulls out a glass hourglass filled with sand. Paralyzed with a sudden, overwhelming dread, Polly immediately stands up and firmly asks the stranger to leave her home. Refusing to budge, the old woman calmly replies that Polly is going to die tonight. Sinking back into her chair in sheer disbelief, Polly threatens to call the police. Fixing her with a ruthless glare, the stranger advises against it, warning that involving the authorities will only guarantee a much more horrific demise. Refusing to entertain this madness any longer, Polly snatches the hourglass, shoves it back into the box, and thrusts it into the woman's chest. Escorting the unwelcome guest out into the freezing night, Polly prepares to slam the door. But before she can, the old woman softly calls out her first name. Freezing in her tracks, Polly demands to know how she learned her name. Offering a grim, emotionless smile, the stranger simply apologizes that Polly will not wake up to see tomorrow's sunrise. Slamming the door and locking every deadbolt, Polly frantically dials her mother, spilling the terrifying details of the encounter. Dismissing the entire ordeal, her mother tells her to look out the window. Peeking through the blinds, Polly's heart sinks into an abysmal pit. The wooden box is lying completely abandoned in the snow at the edge of the driveway. Still on the line, her mother rationalizes that it must be some bizarre cult tactic, urging Polly to ignore the artifact, step away, and focus on picking out a professional outfit for her upcoming job interview. Attempting to distract her racing mind, Polly retreats to her bedroom to try on various clothes, snapping a few mirror selfies to gauge her appearance. Reviewing the images on her screen, she entirely misses the terrifying towering shadow standing perfectly still in the background of her photos. Suddenly, an inexplicable whisper echoes from the hallway, startling her. Creeping out of the room to investigate, she finds the corridor completely empty. Hoping to calm her frayed nerves, she lights a cigarette. Redialing her mother, she tearfully confesses that the old woman's prophecy feels sickeningly real. Wandering upstairs while still on the phone, she searches every dark corner of the house, but finds absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. Returning to the living room, she sits on the couch and lights a second cigarette. Looking down at the coffee table, a wave of sheer terror washes over her. The archaic wooden box, which was just lying out in the freezing snow, is now sitting perfectly centered on her table. Opening the lid with trembling hands, she pulls out the hourglass, noting that the sand is completely stuck and refusing to flow. At this exact moment, the comforting tone of her mother's voice on the phone shifts into a deep demonic growl. The sinister voice states that the game hasn't even started yet, coldly adding, "I am not your mother. You are going to die." Slamming the phone down in an unhinged panic, Polly backs away. Seconds later, the landline rings again. Answering with a shaking hand, she hears the same tyrannical voice outline the conditions of her survival. To break the curse, Polly must place 3 specific items inside the box: something she loves, something she needs, and something she hates. The entity explicitly warns her not to attempt any tricks. As they are always watching, staring blankly at the cursed artifact, Polly desperately tries to decipher the twisted riddle. Hoping a simple offering will suffice, she grabs her half-empty cigar box, places it inside the wooden container, and shuts the lid. Popping it back open a moment later, she finds the cigars still sitting there, completely unaccepted. Frustrated and terrified, she storms away from the table. However, the moment she turns her back, the sand inside the hourglass finally begins to pour. An invisible, crushing force violently wraps around her throat, choking the breath from her lungs. Dropping to her knees in absolute agony, she violently coughs and vomits onto the floor, expelling an old, rusted metal key. Gasping for air, Polly flees her cursed home and frantically knocks on a neighbor's door. A young woman answers, currently distracted by her own phone call, but graciously allows the terrified Polly inside to use her landline. Pacing the unfamiliar kitchen, Polly suddenly feels an oppressive heavy aura fill the room. Without warning, pulling a large butcher knife from the counter, the woman firmly plants the blade pointing upright on the dining table. Before Polly can even process the horrifying scene, the neighbor mercilessly slams her own face down onto the razor-sharp tip. Pulling herself off the bloody blade, the unhinged woman repeats the gruesome action again and again, her face mangled beyond recognition. Collapsing backward, the possessed neighbor turns her ruined face toward Polly. Speaking with a legion of overlapping demonic voices, the entity claims that Polly is the one who caused this tragic death. The voices taunt her, boasting that they are everywhere, and warning that no one else can ever know about the curse. Peering down at her own trembling body, Polly lifts her shirt, revealing words that have been freshly and inexplicably carved into her flesh. "Don't you dare." Driven by a surge of pure anger, she forcefully sweeps the archaic box and the hourglass right off the coffee table. But the very second she blinks, the cursed objects instantly reset themselves, resting perfectly undisturbed on the wooden surface, as if gravity itself had been rewritten. Suddenly, her cell phone illuminates with an incoming call from her father. The reality of the situation hits her like a freight train. Her father has been dead. Answering the chilling call, a distorted voice provides a grim hint for the next offering. It tells her she must provide something she truly hates, not just something she is supposed to hate. The entity taunts her to check the dark closet beneath her bed, reminding her that the sand is rapidly running out. Snatching the rusted key she had vomited earlier, Polly cautiously approaches the gloomy bedroom closet. Finding a hidden, locked drawer tucked in the back, she inserts the key and turns the mechanism. Completely absorbed in searching the deep drawer for answers, she fails to notice an unseen force quietly easing the heavy closet door shut behind her. Inside the drawer, she discovers a tragic photograph of her father in his final days, lying in a hospital bed, wearing a silver cross necklace as cancer ravaged his body. Beside the photo lies the very same cross necklace. Securing the religious artifact, she turns to leave, only to find the closet door completely locked from the outside. Panic instantly sets in. Stepping backward into the cramped, dark space, she is met with a blood-curdling horror. Her father's rotted, decaying corpse, still draped in his filthy hospital gown, lunges at her from the shadows. She kicks at the door until the latch finally gives way. She is nearly dragged back under the bed by a pair of pale, decaying hands reaching from the darkness. Breaking free, she scrambles to the living room and places the silver cross inside the wooden box. Harboring deep, unspoken resentment toward God for allowing her devotedly Christian father to suffer such a horrific, lingering death, she closes the lid. Reopening it a moment later, she breathes a sigh of relief. The cross has vanished, and the sand in the hourglass has magically reset. But the psychological torment is far from over. Hearing a voice call her name, she turns toward a large decorative mirror. Staring back at her is her own reflection, moving entirely on its own. Walking closer, She watches the twisted image of herself begin stabbing wildly at the glass from the other side, shrieking that Polly is already dead. The unhinged reflection violently smashes its own forehead against the mirror, shattering the glass outward. Polly stumbles backward, only to bump directly into a towering blood-soaked doppelganger standing right behind her. Before she can even scream, the bloody apparition vanishes into thin air. Just as the silence returns, her phone rings once more. It is her sister, Lainey, sounding frantic and confused. Lainey claims Polly just called her 5 times in a row, hysterically warning that something terrible was about to happen to little Allie. Glancing out her front window, Lainey states she can see Polly standing motionless right across the street. Realizing the supernatural entity is hunting her family, Polly screams into the receiver, begging Lainey to lock the doors and ignore the shape-shifting imposter outside. Dropping the phone, Polly attempts to sprint out of her house to save them, but the front door is completely sealed shut. Every time she unlocks the deadbolt, an invisible hand clicks it back into place. Defeated and paralyzed with fear, she collapses in front of the wooden box, sobbing and begging the entity to reveal its final twisted demand. Suddenly, the television set powers on by itself. The screen displays a home video of little Allie playing on the floor. In the footage, Polly is playfully pointing directly at one of the child's small toes. Desperate to sever the supernatural connection, she unplugs the heavy television cord from the wall, but the screen continues to glow, relentlessly looping the image of the toe. This brings us back to the horrifying moments of believing a piece of her own flesh is required to spare her niece. Polly grabs a pair of heavy pliers and ruthlessly amputates her small toe. Sobbing through the unimaginable pain, placing the severed piece inside the box, she crawls away to bandage her foot. Yet upon returning, the box rejects the offering. Seeking guidance from the shattered mirror, her reflection cruelly reveals a missing index finger, proving the entire ordeal was a sadistic trick meant to prolong her suffering. Without hesitation, Polly picks up the bloody pliers once again. Suppressing her screams, she cleanly severs her index finger. With trembling, blood-soaked hands, she drops the digit into the wooden box alongside the rejected toe. Opening it seconds later, both gruesome offerings have disappeared. The hourglass resets perfectly, and the heavy front door effortlessly swings open on its own. Bleeding profusely, she drags herself into her car and speeds recklessly toward Lainey's house. Arriving at the property, she finds the front door ajar and the interior suffocatingly quiet. Limping up the wooden staircase, she is met with an abysmal tragedy. Both Lainey and little Allie are lying dead, their skin pale and lifeless. Dropping to her knees, Polly breaks down in a fit of inconsolable weeping. Suddenly, every single telephone in the house begins to ring simultaneously. Looking up through her tears, she sees the cursed wooden box and the hourglass resting perfectly undisturbed on the floor. Answering the nearest phone, the innocent voice of her deceased niece echoes through the speaker, asking what Polly truly loves. Gazing at the lifeless bodies of her family, Polly despondently replies that she loved the 2 people the curse just stole from her. Realizing what must be done to fulfill the final demand, Polly grabs a sharp kitchen knife. Approaching Allie's cold body, she gently cuts a thick chunk of the child's hair. She places the lock of hair inside the archaic box and closes the lid. Upon reopening it, the hair has vanished. At this exact moment, a miraculous sound echoes from the stairs. Lainey comes rushing down, completely unharmed and bewildered. Filled with a surge of frantic hope, Polly rushes back to the upstairs bedroom to check on Allie. Shaking the small girl, Allie slowly opens her eyes and smiles. But as Polly pulls her niece into a desperate embrace, the child's face begins to violently cave in, forming a massive, rotting sinkhole in the center of her skull. Attempting to pull away in sheer terror, the decaying nightmare grabs Polly with inhuman strength and plunges a knife deep into her stomach. Gasping for breath, Polly jolts awake. The entire horrific sequence at her sister's house was an agonizing hallucination. She is still sitting at her own coffee table, the wooden box sitting mockingly in front of her. Desperate to offer something she loves and needs, she tears the necklace from her throat and even attempts to squeeze fresh blood from her amputated finger into the box. But before she can pull away, a pale, decaying hand shoots out from the tiny, shallow interior of the container, grabbing her wrist with a tyrannical grip and attempting to drag her entire body into the dark abyss of the wooden prison. Thrashing wildly, she finally manages to break the creature's hold. Sitting in the absolute silence of her living room, a chilling realization washes over her. The frail old woman from the beginning didn't just stumble upon her house by accident. The stranger was a previous victim who couldn't finish the grueling tasks, and passing the box was the only way to escape the entity's wrath. Stealing her resolve, Polly marches out into the freezing night and knocks on the door of another neighbor, a young woman named Tara. When Tara opens the door, she is initially hesitant to let the bleeding, frantic woman inside. However, seeing Polly's desperate state, she graciously allows her in to use the phone. Sitting together in the warm living room, Polly begins quietly apologizing, though she cannot bring herself to confess the true reason for her guilt. Reaching into her coat, she pulls out the wooden box and the hourglass, placing them on the table. Without ever being told the neighbor's name, Polly looks her dead in the eyes and calls her Tara, coldly informing the young girl that she is going to die. Confused and uneasy, Tara tries to laugh off the bizarre statement, asking if this is some kind of sick joke. Mimicking the exact chilling words of the old woman who cursed her, Polly simply states, "I'm going to start now," and declares that the box now belongs to Tara. Thoroughly creeped out, Tara forcefully asks her to leave the property. Returning to her own home, Polly finally feels a morbid sense of relief. However, just as she settles into her couch, the shadows in the corner of the room begin to shift. The original old woman is standing there, her face pale, with thick, dark blood weeping from one of her eyes. Clutched tightly in her hands is the archaic box. Weeping hysterically, the old woman claims the curse refused to let her go, demanding she return to finish Polly off for good. Lunging forward with surprising speed, the old woman attempts to violently smash the heavy wooden box against Polly's skull. A ruthless struggle ensues across the living room floor. Grabbing a shard of shattered glass, Polly slashes at her attacker. Given the stranger's frail age, Polly quickly gains the upper hand, snatching a pair of heavy metal scissors and plunging them deep into the old woman's chest. Gurgling on her own blood, the dying woman offers a tragic confession. She explains how the box was brought to her own doorstep weeks ago. Crippled by utter loneliness, she had foolishly invited the stranger inside, completely unaware she was welcoming a demon into her life. Looking up at Polly with fading eyes, she whispers a final plea, telling her not to be afraid of the end. Moments later, she passes away on the bloody carpet. Listening to the dark whispers echoing in the corners of her mind, Polly finally accepts her inevitable fate. Sitting beside the corpse, she watches the dark sand in the hourglass slip away, grain by grain, until time entirely runs out. Gasping sharply, Polly opens her eyes. With no dead body in sight, letting out a breathless laugh, she assumes the entire harrowing ordeal was merely a hyper-realistic, stress-induced nightmare. However, looking down at her trembling hands, her smile instantly vanishes. Her index finger and pinky toe are still missing, completely wrapped in bloody bandages. Rushing outside into the crisp morning air, she spots the neighbor who had violently stabbed her own face the previous night. Completely oblivious and unharmed, speeding over to her sister's house, Polly bursts through the door and pulls little Allie into a tearful, desperate embrace, thanking God they are alive. Hoping to unravel the final piece of the puzzle, Polly drives to Tara's house to check on the young girl she had cursed. Knocking on the door, Tara answers with a confused, polite smile. When Polly apologizes for her bizarre behavior the previous night, Tara looks completely bewildered. She explains that Polly must be mistaking her for someone else, as she just arrived back in town this morning for the Christmas holidays. Apologizing for the awkward misunderstanding, Polly slowly walks back to her car. But as the camera shifts perspective, the abysmal truth is revealed. Looking through Tara's living room window, we see the young girl standing alone. One of her hands is heavily bandaged, completely missing fingers, exactly like Polly's. Smeared across the living room wall in fresh blood are the words, "Don't tell anyone or you die." And lying perfectly still on the carpet behind her are the mutilated, lifeless bodies of Tara's parents.